Morning, everybody. Welcome to part 3 on the great guitar players. We're going to keep digging in and digging through these great players. Today we're going to do number 11 on my list, Barney Kessel. And Barney's got a beautiful, clean tone, really expressive player. It just has a wonderful crispness to it. You know, it's like a shot of apple cider on a fall day. It's just crisp, tight, pungent, tangy. It's just got a nice ring to it. I've always loved his tone. He was born October 17, 1923 in Muskogee, Oklahoma. I'm surprised I've been finding some guys from Oklahoma that are not really what you consider a jazz hotbed. But Oscar Pettiford's from OKC. There's something else just recently I was from Oklahoma. I can't remember. Charlie Christian. So Barney Kessel is also from Oklahoma. But he ends up moving west, becomes a member of the Wrecking Crew, which I discussed in episode 2 briefly. A big conglomerate of West Coast studio musicians that perform in infinite settings. He's part of the Phil Spector Wall of Sound, which all the Wrecking Crew, they were also called the first call musicians. The term Wrecking Crew was debated as whether it was actually being used at the time, but it's certainly what it's been called posthumously. In the 40s, he's playing with Charlie Barnett. He plays with Artie Shaw. In the early 50s, he works with Oscar Peterson Trio. He's works solo quite a lot. He's works with the Poll Winners, Ray Brown and Shelly Manne. Julie is her name, the great Julie London record. He's just fantastic on that record, and one of the first places where I really heard him. He's also working with the Monkees and the Beach Boys, showing you that these guys in the Wrecking Crew show up in a lot of places. He works with Billie Holiday, Sweets Edison, Buddy DeFranco, Anita O'Day, Shorty Rogers, and many more. It's a pretty prolific string. This is what we're listening to right now. This is one of his first records, C3511 on Contemporary. A nice session. Right off the bat, I see Charlie Christian's name. 16 years old when he met Charlie Christian. So Christian seems to be really a focal point in this whole history that I've been doing. This is Buddy Shank, Buddy Collette, Harry Babison, Arnold Ross, Claude Williamson, Shelly Manne. Some great players on this. He makes a number of recordings for Contemporary fairly quickly. 3513 comes up right away. Again, a fantastic session on Contemporary. And I believe 3512 was also. So yeah, he gets 3 straight releases in a row. 3511, 12, and 13 are all, which speaks of there being a vault of his stuff somehow that they didn't put out, and then they do. But 35, 11, 12, and 13 are pretty early in the Contemporary 12-inch series, which starts at 3500. So, but again, these early records really illustrate how beautiful and dexterous a player he was, and he's a name that has a fairly big amount of ring out. People know Kessel fairly well. This is 3521. Music to listen to Barney Kessel, and it's just fantastic. You can't help but feel West Coast cool when you have those beach photos like that. Some Like It Hot, the great film from the 50s. He's doing the music to that here. Some great musicians on this. And it's actually a fun movie with Marilyn Monroe, Tony Curtis, and Jack Lemmon. Some early gender bending stuff going on in that. Some Like It Hot. You know that's true. Working out with the Barney Kessel Quartet a little bit later. Still 3585, so it's still pretty contemporary. The Carmen record is again a musical, and this is modern jazz performance of from Bizet's opera. No, it's not a musical; it's an opera. Sorry. It's got some of the vibe of Sketches of Spain without the Gil Evans stuff, but it's a beautiful Latin tinge expose, as it were. And then this is on a weird Charlie Parker label, which has a lot of interesting stuff on it, from Lester Young to Cecil Payne to this Barney Kessel with Harold Land, the great tenor player. The cover is dated, obviously. It's funny how Reed Miles can do something like this at Blue Note and it still looks great. But this definitely has time has not been so kind to that. And then I mentioned the Poll Winner records. I think they're important to show. And it's also a reflection of the popularity of the white musicians. You know, Poll Winners, Ray Brown, who's a brother obviously, but Shelly Manne, Barney Kessel. You know, these 4 records are all pretty outstanding exposés of 3 of the most talented guys in the game who could play virtually any instrument in any style. You know, Ray plays in all kinds of settings, as of course does Shelley and Barney. Next guy we're going to talk about here is the wonderful Howard Roberts. Howard Roberts is a guy whose records I passed over for way too long. You know, partly because a lot of them are on Capitol. And I've always kind of been hesitant to buy stuff on Capitol. A lot of the album covers have that type of a vibe to them, which makes it hard to discern what the music's going to look and sound like. With some labels, you get a pretty good idea from the art. With Capitol, it's more about selling records, obviously being a mainstream label. But his work as a sideman has caught my attention many times, and including that fantastic Pinky Winters record that took me a long time to track down, and I've talked to on several occasions. That record's outstanding, and Howard Roberts is brilliant on that. It's something I need to correct. I need to pick up more of his Capitol stuff. And the good thing is you can find his Capitol records for $5-10. But he's a beautiful player. He was born October 2nd, 1929 in Phoenix, Arizona, another town that's not really a jazz hotbed. He started playing guitar at the age of 8. In 1915, he moved to Los Angeles, which, of course, if you're in Phoenix, that's the logical place to go. Works with Neil Hefti in the studios, Henry Mancini on the studios, Chico Hamilton, and George Van Epps. Works with Bobby Troop, who helped sign him to Verve, where he makes an earlier record there. He's also working with the Wrecking Crew, just like Barney Kessel, so he's showing up on all kinds of side work there. Projects he was included on includes Twilight Zone, I Love Lucy, The Munsters, The Brady Bunch, Gilligan's Island, Batman, Beverly Hillbillies, Mission Impossible, Peter Gunn, and Dragnet, to name a few. Like, he's on a lot of things. Works with Peggy Lee, Dean Martin, and many more. Like I said, the majority of his work is on the Capitol label. I've passed it up for the most part mistakenly, because he's a great player, and from what I can tell, some of his albums are going to be more jazzy, some are going to be more pop influenced, but the playing's always going to be the playing. And then this is something he comes back to Verve in the probably mid-60s, 65 looks like, or so 66. He makes another session for Verve here with woodwinds and strings. This is a beautiful melancholy record, a lovely timbre to it. I'm a big fan of that session. He's a guy that's definitely worth taking note of, and his records, like I said, are out there to be found for a good price. Now, moving on to number 13, we're going to talk about one of my favorite players, and he's probably the first one on the list that I really listen to a lot, and that's the great Johnny Smith. And talk about a sensitive empathy for people. Like his playing, it just kind of has a sorrow to it, and it's like he gets the lyric and what it's trying to say, and he emotes it so well. There must have been a real sadness in Johnny Smith, but he's just a wonderful, clever, talented player who I get endless enjoyment from his Roost catalog. And a little background here, he was born June 25th, 1922 in Birmingham, Alabama. So we're really seeing this jazz diaspora come from all over the country. He's kind of labeled a cool jazz guy, but he's capable of playing bebop and very modern. He ends up in Maine, which is a weird place for jazz to be, but it makes that Moonlight in Vermont album make a little more sense. He learns to play tuning guitars in pawn shops. I'm gonna come to your pawn shop, and if you let me play your guitars, I'll tune them, or I'll tune your guitars and learn to play. And that's a pretty interesting way to learn how to be a master of your craft. There's a lot of tragedy here because it's tough to, I guess I'll just say, in 57 his wife died in childbirth, along with this child. And it's gotta have led to a lot of struggle. He ends up sending his daughter to go live in Colorado with his parents. And he comes to a bridge in the road where he recognizes he has to choose either his career or being there with his daughter. And he ends up kind of walking away and moves to Colorado and leaves New York, leaves touring. And he had many people call him trying to get him to come back to the road, back to the studio. And he did play some locally in Colorado from what I read, and maybe did a few sessions here and there in Denver. But he pretty much hung it up. And it's kind of a sad fate for what's one of the most beautiful players that I can really think of. Like I said, he wouldn't tour. He works with Stan Getz on that early Roost stuff, the Ruth Price, which is a session on Roost, which is kind of co-credited. Beverly Kenny, same thing. And then he works with Hank Jones some. But for the most part, he's going to be his own engine and record for himself. I got his 4 10-inches. This is with Stan Getz at NBC. That's a nice little 10-inch. These are all on Roost. This is Johnny Smith Quintet with Stan Getz again, Roost 413. I'm almost completed the Roost 10-inch sequence now. 421 in a mellow tone or mood, and then Johnny Smith in a sentimental mood. These are both beautiful 10-inch album covers, a lovely monotone color. And then we're going to dive into his 12-inch career, and this is what we're listening to, where he plays Jimmy Van Heusen, who does a lot of arranging, I guess, for Frank Sinatra. But Johnny Smith Quartet, and in the about 55 titles that Roost does on the 12-inch, there's, I think, 24 Johnny Smith records. And this was 2201. When you get one of the first ones, there's an Eddie Draw Octai Davis that's actually on a different number, like 1200 or something. But then they move it to 2200, probably because a lot of other labels had the 1200 number going, which is the 12-inch LP. But this is Johnny Smith 2203. So again, 2 records later, George Roumanis, Muzi Alexander, Bob Poncos on the piano. I love the cover. It's like he's looking through dentist glass or something right there. This is the Moonlight in Vermont with Stan Getz, and I guess that's evoking his time in Maine about as good as you can evoke anything to do with the state of Maine. For those of you in Europe, Maine is a pine tree, wolf and bear haven, north of Boston. Pretty much, there's a coastal strip that's populated, and the rest of it's woods. This is Moods with Johnny Smith. Beautiful sunburst on the guitar there. Again, his tone is just wonderful, electric, just jumping out of the fucking speaker. The new Johnny Smith Quartet, fantastic cover again, wonderful playing. And this is what I'm going to say about these records of his on Roost. Don't go online and pay $60 for them. But if you see them somewhere for less than 20, any one of them is worth having. His playing is always beautiful. The Johnny Smith Foursome, number 2223, and I've showed you, what, 7 records already? 2228, another great album. A lot of them are trios, some of them are quartets, but it's mostly about the guitar showcases. 2231, Rodgers and Hammerstein's The Flower Drum Suite, which a lot of people in jazz were building records off of that stuff. Easy Listening, Johnny Smith Trio, which is actually a beautiful record. One of the last ones I found, actually. Just got that one not that long ago. Johnny Smith Favorites, more of that beautiful guitar. Johnny Smith Trio, Designed for You. It's just an incredible body of work. And most of it's being recorded at Roost between 54, 56, 57. And Roost starts to falter by 58, and Roulette eventually comes in. And I think Roulette actually kind of manages the Roost imprint for a while. And towards the end of the Roost run, they start adding titles from the Roost Vaults, and Leah Shun still has Roost Records, which is kind of cool. 2239, This Is My Dear Little Sweetheart. The cover will kind of scare you away, but it's a beautiful record. Wonderful melancholy. Johnny guitar and strings. Another fantastic record. He certainly has a wonderful collection of guitars. Johnny Smith plus the trio. This is an awesome record. I just tracked this one down as well this past month. Johnny Smith, The Sound of the Guitar. It just kind of keeps coming. 2243, 2246, 2248. It's a fantastic cover. Read Miles' Ask if you ask me. By now we're probably 1958, 59 right there. And we're coming to the end of the run here. This is just a reissue of the Moonlight Vermont record with a different cover. Because Stan Getz was having big success by that point. Because Roost Through Roulette probably puts that out in 61 as Getz is really exploding. The Guitar World of Johnny Smith, Reminiscing, and that wraps up his Roost catalog, and that's all of it there, and that's 2259. So there's 59 titles that we talked about, and about 24 of them were Johnny Smith, and Sonny Stitt makes up a big chunk of the rest of it. You know, there's a few other artists in there that are great, but it's really the Sonny Stitt show and the Johnny Smith show at the great Roost label. And I'm a big fan of the Roost stuff, the 10-inch stuff. They're really one of the most important labels that doesn't stick around very long, but they certainly had a large impact. This is he goes to Verve in probably 65. And he makes 3 records for Verve that are also beautiful records. A little bit more production going on, oversight, not quite just the simple trio stuff that a lot of his Roost stuff is. So the Roost stuff's what I really, really love. But Johnny Smith is just a wonderful player. I never have not enjoyed putting on one of his Roost albums. They're just, like I said, and they're a great value. You can find that bevy of Roost material. You can find a lot of those records 10, 15, 20 bucks. Don't pass them up. They're great, and you'll enjoy them for the rest of your life. Now, at number 14 on my list here is the great Mundell Lowe. And I'm a big fan of Mundell Lowe. I discovered him, quite honestly, just trying to complete off the early Riverside sequence. That early 200 series. There's a lot of artists in there that are fairly obscure and unknown. And that's true for every label, maybe with the exception of Blue Note. Blue Note probably has the most legacy on par for every player. And there's obscure Blue Note records and artists for sure, but not compared to like Argo or even Riverside. There's a lot of guys that you just don't know who the heck are these people. And that's even after collecting jazz for years, you just haven't heard of these guys. But most of them really all of them are fantastic players. Like I've said many times, you don't get to record in the studios in New York in the 50s not be able to play. They're not going to waste that tape on you. You got to be able to play. And these guys can all play. Mundell Lowe was born Shady Grove, Mississippi, from the deep south, April 21st, 1922. He does a lot of work in TV as well, which we've always found that's true for the white artists. White musicians who stay in music, become union card carrying members, find work. Black guys either play jazz till they're broken dead, die young, or often, if they do, quit and retire, become teachers. That's the outcome of most black musicians in jazz. It seems like from the research I've done in many of these different in-depth episodes, the black musicians don't have the same options to continue making a living in music like the white musicians were given. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Mundell. He's a friend of Bill Evans going back to the early days, and it's actually Mundell Lowe that references Bill Evans to Orrin Keepnews at Riverside and has Orrin bring in Bill Evans, and shortly after that Miles discovers Bill Evans, and Evans becomes the Bill Evans that most of us know and love today. They were also friends with Tony Scott, and so there's sessions actually where Evans, Mundell Lowe, and Tony Scott are all kind of playing together. They moved to New Jersey together, and it was just they didn't all get to move together, but they moved there and kind of connected there is what I meant to say. But he's friends with John Hammond, the great talenter of music. After the war, he comes back to New York City looking for work, works with Ray McKinley, who has those records at Savoy I showed you in the Savoy series. For 2 years, he's with the Benny Goodman Band. He works in the Today Show Band for a while. He was working with the Dorseys, again with Bill Evans, Billie Holiday, Red Norvo, Charlie Mingus, Lester Young, with singers Carmen McRae, Chris Connor, and like I said, Tony Scott is his friend, who's a multi-instrumentalist. Mundell is a dreamy, breathy player. There's a lot of strands of color, this kind of vibrating cloud of sound. He just has these interesting, he just finds these wonderful, breathy, almost hesitates and then drops it in there. I've enjoyed Mundell's records a great deal. You don't see him as a prolific sideman, and like I said, after these 4 Riverside records there's not this huge body of work, because he's making money in the studios, producing films and movies, and you can't fault them for that. You could only make the observation how different the opportunities were for black guys versus white guys, and it wasn't a talent thing. This is his first one, and it's Riverside 204, so it's the Monk is the 201, and so by 204 his first records come out. Great stuff. And then Mundell Lowe, Guitar Moods, comes from almost right away, 208, and that's a great album cover. And then 219 is this Alec Wilder record, another beautiful, hard to find record. And then this one's called The Grand Night for Swinging, which actually gets reissued on the Jazzland imprint with this awful cover. Just because you make it a budget label, you have to make budget covers. I've never been quite a guy who comprehended those choices sometimes. But these 4 early Riversides are great guitar jazz, melancholic striations of beauty. I just get lost in them, and they're tough to come by. They haven't been reissued. If one of them was part of the OJC reissue program, I can't recall or I remember seeing it. So that's part of why we remember the Riversides and even Prestiges that we do. Did OJC reissue them? Because those OJC reissues were in record stores and just were kept in our eyes. And even some of the literature that says the OJC, you see those titles, those artists listed, and the ones who escaped the OJC reissue program were more likely to fall off into obscurity, and it makes their records rarer, harder to find because there's only old pressings out there, but it also diminishes the demand because people don't know the names. So you gotta check out Mundell Lowe. He's a beautiful, beautiful player that I'm a huge fan of. One of the great players I kind of stumbled on in doing this session was Oscar Moore. And I was kind of aware of him because he makes this record on Riverside with the singer Inez Jones. And it's not even part of the official Riverside sequence. It's number 819, which must have been something they did for Singer. I'm not really sure what the 800 sequence is about. It doesn't have anything to do with any of their other series of titles. I did not find another number in that title on Riverside. But it's an interesting cover, and it's an interesting lineup as well. So this is how I knew about Inez Jones, Oscar Moore. Carl Perkins is on the piano, Curtis Counts is on the bass, Bill Douglas is on the drums. It was recorded in Hollywood in '57. Inez Jones on the vocals. Again, I don't really know much about how this album came to be, but it's a really good record. But in doing this series, I'm like, I need to cover Oscar Moore if I can. I had to look him up, and the number 15 obviously on the list. And he's from Austin, Texas, born December 25th, 1916. And his real claim to fame was he worked with Nat Cole Trio. And he was very instrumental in being part of the Nat Cole Trio. And as we've discovered, Kessel was a part of that for a while. I can't quite remember, but someone else we talked about just yesterday or the day before was in part of that Nat Cole Trio as well for a little bit. But he goes to LA, plays with Nat Cole for a while in that piano, guitar, bass format. And he's just a beautiful player that has a wonderful ability to back Cole. And of course, this is Cole in his piano playing days. He wins many guitar polls in the 40s as the preeminent guitar player, but in part that's because of the successes of Nat Cole Trio. Popularity, as we'll come to see, drives the polls more than ability. If you're a well-selling white player, you're going to have a good shot of winning. If you're a well-selling black player, that's going to give you even more of kind of an elite status in a way. But those are rare. There's not a lot of them. He left Cole in '47, He records as sidemen some in the 50s, but by mid to late 50s he's left the business, which is kind of a sad ending. I had to go buy this record. It took a little while for it to get here. This comes out on Tampa. It was actually on some other label even before that, if I recall. What we're listening to right now, you can see there's a lot of hustle and bustle in the sound, and he's just a really intricate, fantastic player who I need to delve into deeper. He doesn't have a large body of work. I need to find more of that old Nat Cole Trio stuff. I have some of it. I need to find more of it, because for all I've read, it's one of the preeminent groups of that time. And so Oscar Moore's a guy that's very important, and I've really enjoyed what I've heard of him. And so he made it onto number 15 on the list. Number 16 on my list is Jimmy Rainey. And Rainey is a guy who's been brought to my attention a lot. And I have quite a bit of his work. And he does quite a bit as a sideman too. But I think it was actually some of those early Stan Getz recordings at Roost where he's playing with Jimmy Rainey and Al Haig, where I'm like, who's the guitar on this? It's fantastic. And it really kind of piqued my interest. I love this album cover. This is on the Dawn label, one of those kind of underappreciated little labels. But Jimmy Rainey's born August 20, 1927 in Louisville, which is in Kentucky for those of you in Europe. He plays with Red Norvo early on. In the 50s, he's playing with Red Norvo in like early 50s and the mid 50s again, and he replaces Talafarlo in that group. He works with Woody Herman and Artie Shaw, kind of swing outfits, of course. Buddy DeFranco, which is from that same kind of scene. Al Haig, who I mentioned as part of the Roost stuff. They do some stuff together. Bob Bruckermeyer, the great vibraphonist Teddy Charles, who has that West Coast cool down. And of course, Stan Getz, as I mentioned. By 67, he's struggling with the bottle. He ends up leaving New York and going home to Kentucky. He suffers from Mermier's disease, which is the degenerative hearing loss. It never really stopped him from playing. He actually kind of resurfaces briefly in the 70s. He plays cool, he plays bebop, he plays modern, and he's just a really fantastic player who probably deserved a little bit more time. He records for ABC and makes 3 or 4 great records there with Al Cohn, Bob Bruckermeyer, and Red Mitchell. This one is on Prestige. It's just titled the letter A, which is a weird title for a record. It's from a few different sessions in 54, 55. It was issued like in 57, if I recall. Another Jimmy Rainey with Bob Bruckermeyer on ABC. Again, ABC is going to become Impulse not too long after this. This is a little later, from probably 59, maybe 60, from Sweden, swinging in Sweden, Jimmy Rainey and George Wallington. And from what I understand, this is 2 different sessions. They had different sides. They're not playing together, which is interesting that they bothered to get them to take a picture together on a Volvo, no less. Probably in New York, though. But this is not them together. So why they put them in a photo together, who knows? That's how things go. This is the Dawn White record, which we're listening to. And of course, this is one more on ABC. And this is kind of a tribute to 4 guitar players, the foremost guitars. Jimmy Rainey, the aforementioned, Chuck Wayne, who we're going to do cover in a minute, Joe Puma, and Dick Garcia. We're going to cover all 4 of those guys. And it's a Jimmy Rainey record because he was the one that was on the ABC label. So we're going to leave it here in his section. But all 4 of those guys are featured on that, making it a very fun, dancey, dartable, guitar playful record. It's really a blast. The next guy we're going to talk about, number 17 on the list, is Les Spann. And Spann's an interesting guy. He actually plays the flute as well as the guitar. And that's not a very common duality. Usually a flute player is also a sax player. A trumpet player might play some trombone. You don't get the flute guitar combination very often. But he's a very fun, great rhythmic player, has a lot of pulse to what he does. He's born May 23rd, 32 in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. He goes to school in Tennessee. In 57, he starts working with Phineas Newborn. Works with him on some of his RCA material. He works with Ronell Bright, who has a great record on the Regent label, actually with Kenny Burrell. He works with 56 with Dizzy Gillespie. So there's a couple of Verve records with Dizzy Gillespie that have Les Spann featured on them. And 56, it looks like 58, he goes to Europe with Quincy Jones. And he's on quite a few of Quincy Jones albums on Mercury, MRC, and ABC from the late 50s. He shows up on a lot of those records. And Quincy's, of course, one of the great voicers in jazz. He really has a great way of orchestrating and arranging music with his musicians. He works with Ellington briefly on the Hodges Ellington records back-to-back and side-by-side. Sweets Edison's also featured on those records. Sam Jones is a great bass player at Riverside, who's on endless Riverside sessions and a few Blue Notes, the Cannonball Adderley, something else. Sam Jones is a great bass player, really underappreciated. Les Spann's on both of those records he makes as a leader at Riverside, in part because he was at Riverside at that point, I'm sure. The other people he works with of note: Duke Pearson, Sonny Stitt, Abby Lincoln, Billy Taylor, Randy Weston, Ben Webster, Red Garland, Jerome Richardson, Nat Adderley, Eddie Lockjaw Davis, just to name a few. But he only gets his one record as a leader, and it's a fantastic little record. You hear how sprightly and full of life he is. He seems, even by his face, to be a fun, easygoing character, and it really seems to come across in his playing. So that's Les Spann, number 17. So number 18 on my list is the great Chuck Wayne. And I'm a big Chuck Wayne guy. We talked about this record some in the Savoy series we did last month. This was the Sims and Brew More. And then it came out on 10-inch first. It was reissued as a 12-inch, number 12077. Puts it probably in late 56. This came out on 12-inch. This has Harvey Leonard's on this as well, George Vivier, Ed Shaughnessy, along with the Sims, Brew More, and Chuck Wayne. And it's just a bubbly session. Chuck Wayne was born February 27, 1923 in New York City. He plays the cool, he plays swing, and he plays bebop. And he was actually considered an innovator on guitar for being a bebopper. He played like Parker on the guitar and kind of really raised some eyebrows with some of his inventions. This is a quote I read. His guitar chords and arpeggios took generic tetrad forms and all possible inversions and varying degrees of open voicings. And I can't explain that to you too well. I know that inversions are when you play a guitar chord with a not normal structure. What would normally be a C, you do two different strings along with the root and make it a different C. I'm not a great guitar player. I can play some and do some writing on it, but I'm certainly not a well-versed guitar player to be able to tell you what tetrad forms and all. Some of it's beyond me, but it was to the point where they actually wrote books posthumously about his inventions and innovations. So when they're writing books about what you did, you change some things. Groovin' High with Dizzy Gillespie, also on Savoy. He makes a couple great solos on that record. On the track Groovin' High is a great example of jazz bebop on the guitar. It's fantastic stuff. He works with Coleman Hawkins, Red Norvo, Bud Powell, Jack Teagarden, George Shearing, and Lester Young. So again, some pretty impressive people. In the 50s, he's working with Tony Bennett. He works with Gil Evans, Brew Moore's at Sims, and George Wallington, which is probably that. I can't remember which Wellington section it was, honestly. But I love Chuck Wayne. I need to find more of his work. He has some other work as a leader, but not easy to find. There's a 10-inch I'm looking to pick up right now from a seller, but the seller's actually going through the weather down in Texas, and he's had no power, so I'm holding on, waiting back to hear back from him. Fantastic, hard to find record. And for what I've seen, this record will fetch you near $100 nowadays. It's pretty tough to come by. So at number 19, we're going to talk about the great Charlie Byrd. And Byrd's kind of synonymous with the bossa nova, but there's a career that Byrd had prior to the bossa nova, so he's not just a Brazilian jazz, Latin-inflected player. He's capable of doing a lot of different things. He's so associated with that jazz samba record, and people kind of forget there was a lot of Charlie Byrd before that. He's born in Suffolk, Virginia, not far from the D.C. area. He actually goes to Spain and is taught by Andres Segovia for a while. You hear Django in Paris, and that made an obvious impact on his playing. In 57 with Ketter Betts, he's working at the Showboat in DC, and that leads to some actually recording sessions at this offbeat label that puts out a lot of his Showboat stuff. And it's kind of under the radar, a small regional label. And Riverside ends up buying all those titles after they sign Charlie Byrd, and they signed Byrd after his success at Verve with Stan Getz. Riverside's like, oh yeah, let's sign that guy. And they issue some kind of bossa nova stuff right off the bat with him. Then they grab his 6 titles from Offbeat, and they issue all 6 of those consecutively in the Riverside 440 in there somewhere. And so there's like 6 or 7 Charlie Byrd records in a row at Riverside. He goes to Brazil in the late 50s. Through some connections and friends, he's actually become popular on the radio over there. He ends up working with João Gilberto and just makes some real inroads into the Brazilian sound. He comes back and he turns Stan Getz onto it. And they agree that they're going to attempt to record. And they talk to Creed Taylor at Verve, and Creed Taylor's all about it. Creed Taylor recognizes business opportunity when he sees it. And their first attempt was really misguided. They ended up scrapping the entire session and having to rehire all new musicians. And instead they bring in musicians that had been in Brazil with Charlie Byrd. It's guys that were more familiar with the samba, the rhythm and pulse of it, and how it actually worked. And so it was actually more difficult to pull it off than anyone anticipated. But thank goodness they did, because they got it right. The samba record's fantastic. They bring in a whole new lineup of guys, including what I think is interesting, 2 drummers. A guy by the name of Bill Rickenbach and a guy by the name of Buddy Deppenschmidt. And it's actually with the 2 drummers where they can kind of create that samba groove. And that's how difficult it was to do it. It was so unconventional to how we approached it that it took some real maneuvering to pull the sound off. They record the record at All Souls Unitarian Church because the acoustics were so fantastic. In April '62, the record comes out. By September, it's in the charts. By March of the following year, it's number 1 in the charts. It makes a huge impact. And there's no term bossa nova at this point. That comes along a little later. It stays 70 weeks in the charts, this record, Ja Samba. So it's a very important record. And then it ends up leading to there being a number of popularity polls. And both Getz and Charlie Byrd become obviously very popular because those records are selling. And as I've said before, popularity and polls are often dictated by sales, exposure. Oh, I loved him. I listened to his record all year. He's my favorite. And you're honestly asking on an uninformed base to vote when you do these polls. You know, if you want to have a musician poll that really has any merit to it, you really should poll the musicians. It's a bit like the NBA All-Star Game. When you have fans voting, the cities with the biggest fan bases, international players and fan bases, they're going to get your All-Stars. And you should have the players voting. The players would vote for who the best defender is, who the best center is. They would know better. But popularity and fan involvement, that's what the polls were about. And that popularity mattered. He makes a couple sessions at Savoy, and these are both 12099, 12116. Puts them probably 57, 58 in that era. Both great records. You can hear the inflections of the Brazilian sound, but he certainly hasn't gone down that road full steam yet. This is some of his Brazilian bossa nova stuff at Riverside. This is 427, and that's, like I said, after bossa nova with Stan Getz. This is another one, bossa nova Pela Passaros, I believe it is. So it's Riverside trying to cash in on what's happening. And then this is part of those offbeat sessions that they buy out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All 6 of those are from the Offbeat label, and they change. Riverside buys them out. And they become pretty good selling titles for the Riverside label. Why they didn't sporadically release them to allow them to sell better Maybe they knew the bossa nova thing was only going to last so long. Hard to really say. But he makes a few more great records here. This is a great Riverside title. That's actually him recording for Riverside again. This is at the Village Vanguard live. Village Gate, I think it is actually. Charlie Byrd with voices. So Riverside has a lot of material by him. Solo Flight. And these all come out. Then he goes to Columbia and he makes a lot of poppy, light jazz, guitar, easy listening records. But Charlie Byrd's early days have a lot of merit to them, and they shouldn't be overlooked. And if you see those Riverside titles, or by chance one of the old offbeat record covers, grab them. They're good records. The Savoy titles are great. You will enjoy them, I promise. He's a wonderful player, and he's not just a Brazilian bossa nova guy. He certainly was instrumental in the bossa nova happening, but he deserves more recognition than just being that. So if I was at gunpoint and someone said to me, who's your favorite jazz guitarist? I'd want to throw some other names out there and sound cooler and hipper and deeper and knowledgeable, but I'd be lying if I didn't say Kenny Burrell. I love Kenny Burrell. He's just such a magician. And he's a chameleon as well, because he can really graft himself to any session, to any sound, from rock, pop, R&B to one of the greatest jazz soloists. Hard bop, bebop, cool, modern. He can play in any style. He's just a virtuoso of the highest degree, but he's also emoting from a genuine place and expressing things in a wonderful way. I just always connect with his playing. And I've talked about how Jimmy Cleveland on the trombone has grabbed me by the throat a dozen times where I've been listening to a record and all of a sudden I'm like, who's on the trombone? That's sick. Ooh. And it ends up being Jimmy Cleveland. And Kenny Burrell's done that for me on guitar endless times. I can't tell you how many times I've been listening to a record and it can be some from such disparate fields. I've been, oh, that's a great guitar. Who's that? And it's Kenny Burrell over and over and over again. Some guys like Grant Green are fairly limited in their stylings. He does what he does really well, but he's not going to diversify and do a lot of different settings. And you can put Kenny Burrell in pretty much any setting, and he will excel. He's, of course, born in Detroit, Michigan, the great breeding ground of 1950s, 60s jazz musicians. July 31st, 1931. Influenced by Django, Charlie Christian, T-Bone Walker, and Muddy Waters. People like Jimi Hendrix, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and Peter Frampton have cited him as one of their influences. He comes from in Detroit. He starts his New World Music Society along with Pepper Adams, Donald Byrd, Elvin Jones, and Yusuf Lateef. He's playing around Detroit with these guys. He ends up working with Oscar Peterson in 55. In 56, he goes to Blue Note and makes a couple great records there. Works with Prestige. Is part of some great Prestige jam sessions and records that are fantastic. He ends up going to Verve and having some real success at Verve. And he's also on a number of Jimmy Smith's records at Verve. And they have a big hit together with Organ Grinder Swing with Jimmy Smith on Verve label. His career is prolific. And I'm going to show you his body of work as a leader. It's just immense. But it's also important to recognize he does pages upon pages of side work. I'm going to read off about 15 names here, and this is a scratch on the surface. Gene Ammons, Donald Byrd, Red Garland, Stan Getz, Milt Jackson, Illinois Jacquette, Johnny Hodges, Etta Jones, Hank Jones, Wynton Kelly, Jack McDuff, Gary McFarland, Jimmy Smith, Stanley Turrentine, Frank West, Kai Winding, Jimmy Witherspoon. That's a small sampling. And these are people he kind of worked with on numerous sessions for the most part. The guys he worked with just once, it's 3 pages of names. One of the most prolific sidemen in the business was Kenny Burrell. I don't need to sell him. Most of you guys are big Burrell fans by now. This is one of his first appearances. This is on the Savoy label, one of my favorite album covers of all time. Shows Detroit in the background, the great Gritty Dirty D, Tommy Flanagan, Kenny Burrell, Pepper Adams, Paul Chambers, and of course the great Kenny Clark is backing them up here. These 4 kids are all Detroit kids. You know, Flanagan, Chambers, Adams, and Burrell. And along with the Jones brothers, the Detroit guys make a big impact on the scene and really reshape the sound of modern and a lot of the hard bop sound is these Detroit kids coming from the hard times and the industrial grit. And Blue Note and that grit and that sound of hard driving hard bop, it's not from the refined white collar community. It takes grit and hard work to play something that aggressive, that grinding. Well, I'm going to first show you Burrell's Blue Note body of work. And he leaves Blue Note a few times and comes back. He kind of darts around quite a lot. This was a session reissued, I believe, by Tone Poet last year, but this is an older pressing. I've had this for years. I've had all my Blue Note stuff for 10 years now plus, but great record, worthy of the reissue for sure. This is what we're listening to, another Andy Warhol cover, another beautiful record, also culled from several different sessions if I recall. The Blue Lights records, more Warhol covers, are fantastic, also from several different sessions. This is from early in the 4000 series with Art Blakey. It's a great record. And then this one, he leaves the Prestige and he comes back and records this a few years later. And it's a pretty famous record and pretty well regarded. And then the Japanese issued this KB Blues and Swingin', which is Blue Note outtakes that are both pretty tough to come by. And my guess is Tone Poet will probably jump on those at some point. He goes to Prestige, and his Prestige body works a little bit convoluted. Whereas those Blue Note titles are pretty obviously Kenny Burrell records, all day long, all night long. These were jam sessions, blowing sessions at Prestige, where they brought in some of the great young talent of that moment and then issued them kind of as all day long and all night long. And it's kind of over the years where they've been issued and kind of thought of as Kenny Burrell records. But Donald Byrd gets first billing here, Frank Foster gets first bidding here. Prestige is a loose organization. The oversight, again, a lot of these guys are there to get drug money, get paid out, and go back to the streets and get their high on. But fantastic players on these: Art Taylor, Doug Watkins, Tommy Flanagan, Kenny Burrell, Donald Byrd, Frank Foster. I love Frank Foster. Jerome Richardson, Hank Mobley, Mal Waldron, Doug Watkins, Art Taylor, Donald Byrd. So both of them have fantastic lineups, but they feel looser compared to what Blue Note's doing at the same time. And these aren't even really hard bop; they're more blues-based blowing sessions, and they feel different. They don't feel like that agitation of stuff that's happening at Blue Note. This feels more like a Kenny Burrell record on Prestige. Kenny Burrell Prestige 7088. Fantastic little record. Tommy Flanagan, again, his Detroit buddy. Cecil Payne, I think, is also Detroit. Alvin Jones, Detroit. And Doug Watkins, who actually might be Detroit as well. I'm not positive on Watkins. But fantastic stuff. Here's another one, Earthy. That's not really a Burrell record, but it's kind of given him top billing, and so it's kind of become a Burrell record, but it's just earthy. Prestige. And Al Cohn, Art Farmer, Hal McCusick, Mal Waldron, Teddy Kotick, and Ed Thigpen. I think it might be from two different sessions. I don't recall. But Prestige has a lot of records like this that it's, we just kind of recorded whoever showed up that day, gave them some standards, they played them, and it's great stuff because it's real, it's loose, it's not in any way produced or programmed or has any oversight, but it also means it wasn't rehearsed. There's not that same unity of emotional congregation, and so it feels very emotionally disparate. You know, guys aren't on the same page. One guy might be blowing "I Got Laid Last Night" blues, which is some joyous stuff, and the other guy might be blowing "I Haven't Gotten High in 3 days, I'm Gonna Kill Somebody" blues. And so there's just not that same feeling of unity and focus that so many of the late 1500 Blue Notes have. This is Kenny Burrell with Jimmy Rainey. We talked about Jimmy Rainey earlier on in this episode. They get dual billing on this with, of course, Donald Byrd, the great Jackie McLean, Mal Waldron, Doug Watkins, and Art Taylor. Another fantastic record. And thank goodness for OJC, because a lot of these records would be unapproachable in cost if they weren't on OJC. This now is All Day Long and All Night Long, reissued only a few short years later. And these are actually original pressings of the second pressing versus those early ones, which were OJC pressings. I got them because the covers were cool. You know, I think I might have actually had this one first, but I just love Burrell that much. And this cover is great. This one is not as great, but it's still kind of cool and minimalist. But again, so that's just kind of a repackaging, which Blue Note never does that. Riverside doesn't do that. Riverside doesn't take an album they already put out, give it a new cover, and issue it as a new sequence number 2 years later. But Prestige has no qualms with that. This is another kind of more Burrell-esque record, Soul Call. And if I remember, there might be organ on this. No, it's just Will Davis on the piano, Martin Rivera on the bass, Bill English on the drums, and Ray Burrell on the conga. Probably the conga that I was thinking of. This is the one with the organ, Kenny Burrell with Jack McDuff. And he starts to, at this point, make more, well, Prestige is making soul jazz records by the time this comes out. 73, 47, probably 63, 64, I'm going to guess. 64. This is just the best of Kenny Burrell on Prestige. Just a nice little piece. And then this comes out on the New Jazz imprint with of course, the great John Coltrane. And originals of that go for big money and are fantastic, of course. And then the last thing I want to show you with this Prestige work is this Bossa Nova record that's absolutely outstanding with the great Coleman Hawkins. This is a tough record to find on the Moodsville imprint. It's absolutely beautiful and will sweep you away, and it's a must-have. Speaking of Bossa Nova, this is lots of Bossa Nova, 63 or so on the Cap label, which is kind of a country pop label, not really a jazz label. But this has Barry Galbraith, Bucky Pizzarelli, two guys we've talked about with Burrell, and it's a beautiful Bossa Nova. It just shows you how powerful the Bossa Nova was. Everybody needed to have one. It was kind of taken over. This is the Weaver Dreams, a song he does on Blue Note earlier on, but he redoes it here on Columbia, and he does some singing. And I need to give this another listen. I remember never being that much a fan of his voice, just to be honest, but I need to give it another listen. It's been a long time since I even put it on. One of my favorite Burrell records was at Argo, where he goes to in the early 60s. This is Night at the Village Vanguard, Kenny Burrell Trio, Argo 655. Very tough record to come by nowadays. Beat up copies go for $100. He makes a few more great records at Argo. The Tender Gender, fantastic stuff. 52nd Street, fantastic stuff. Which I think that one's been reissued as Ode. No, Man at Work, I think it's what that's been reissued as. Then he goes to Verve, and like I said, he works with Jimmy Smith. They have quite a bit of success. This is an outstanding record. Another fantastic Verve record. And I'm just going to kind of flip through these now, wrap this up. But he makes a lot of records at the Verve label. Makes a great record at CTI that I'm a big fan of. And I've relied on Kenny Burrell for years at my gigs. Because before a lot of the other guitar players became into my knowing, I've known about Burrell for a long time. He goes to Fantasy, and he becomes kind of a student of Ellington in a way, where he really issues these 2 double albums, Ellington's work, and just shows the reverence that he has for the great architect of this masterpiece building called jazz. And he does a number of other records at Fantasy. Fantastic stuff around midnight. This now it's still at Fantasy, actually. And then he goes to the Muse label, if I recall. He makes a couple great records there, Village Vanguard, Listen to the Dawn. And then he's one of the few guys I have stuff going into the 80s by. This is on Muse as well, a la carte. And then a few more here on Concord, Tintin Deo, and When Lights Are Low. So I don't really pass up Kenny Burrell now when I see him. I have pretty much all of his work up into the mid-70s, and I'm still filling in those gaps as time and money allows. Burrell's stuff, even in the 80s and 90s, has become quite collectible, and the records that, for the most part from that era, that go for $15, Burrell's might go for 30. You know, I've always recommend Kenny Burrell's stuff. He's truly one of my favorites on this whole list, and deservedly so. Deservedly so. So that is numbers 11 through 20. Tune in soon for part 4, sorry. And we're going to make it 5 parts and then do the playlist, just so these episodes don't go too long. This one's already going to push an hour. Y'all be safe. Talk to you soon. I'm Josh Shepard. Subscribe to the channel. If you want to help out and support the channel, go to my Patreon and donate $5 a month. It'd be much appreciated. Helps with my costs and even some record buying. And if there's also some great new merchandise coming out, I got this great new t-shirt I want you to check out. It has all the sheep on the front with different labels on them, and that's my herd. That's what I've been collecting, my herd. And on the back it has a cool little slogan saying hoarding, no herding, LP since 1991 when I started buying vinyl. So grab that t-shirt if you can. It all helps the cause. It helps this channel stay afloat. Y'all be safe. Talk to you soon. Peace.